Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast. I am your host with the most time on his hands. I am Thomas Tipple, FF. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to have this episode. We are joined today for the last guest of our insane run over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But last does definitely not mean worse, especially in this scenario. Big time stuff coming up for us. Of course, we are presented by Underdog Fantasy now. So big shout out to them. You can also go and check out and subscribe to the Dynasty Vipers Network, where you can also find this show and all of our shows. As I mentioned, I am Thomas Tipple. You find me at Thomas Tipple FF. And last year against the Green Bay Packers, Marquise Brown joined Chris Carter and Jermaine Gresham as the only non-running backs to post 10 receptions and under 50 yards in NFL history.
Yeah, my name is Jacob Sanderson. You can find me on Twitter at FF_RTGB. And I was a little late for the bus this morning, but I had to run to the bus stop, and I ran much faster than Jalen Weidermeyer.
Oh, my God.
I wanted to jump right in, but that was a good one. That was a very good one. I'm Billy. You can find me on Twitter at BigBillyFF. The Packers just traded away their number 2 receiver since 2000 in terms of receiving yards, but luckily their number 5 receiver since 2000 in terms of receiving yards is still on the team. Randall Cobb season, baby. Let's go.
Oh no, Dave is going to be so upset. You didn't give it to Lazard.
He's a ways down that list.
As I mentioned, we are joined today by a very special guest. He's director of analytics for Roto Underworld, playerprofiler.com, and the breakoutfinder.com. That, of course, is Josh.
Thanks, guys. So Thomas, when you were like, you need a fun fact for the start of the show, I don't know why, but I didn't immediately go, oh, it's obviously a fantasy football fun fact. So I was going to let everyone know.
It doesn't have to be.
I can solve Rubik.
I once gave a fun fact about dolphins and their stomach
Josh, you're a
progress.
Rubik's Cube guy? Hang on.
I'm a Rubik's Cube guy, but I'll give one of my favorite fun facts because I always like to pound the drum for running backs that catch passes. It's kind of the cheat code in PPR, and many people have heard me say this before, but I'll say it anyway because I think it's just crazy. Jonathan Taylor was the RB1 last season. He had a phenomenal year. If you take Christian McCaffrey's 2019 season and take away every single touchdown he scored a lot of them. Take them all away, he still averaged more points per game in PPR formats than Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, mind you, had 20 touchdowns last year. So he scored a lot of fantasy points, but McCaffrey without the touchdown still would have been higher. Always target running backs who get targets.
It's absolutely insane what he did in 2019. I imagine that everyone that had either Lamar Jackson or Christian McCaffrey definitely walked away with titles. And there were some people out there that got both. And it's game over for everyone else. Josh, we want to thank you for joining us here on the program. You're actually the third person now from Player Profiler to join us, as we obviously had the Podfather himself and Cody Carpentier. Shout out to Rappaport and McAfee for getting that one wrong today. But big ups, like having boots on the ground for the Willis workout, absolutely insane. One thing we like to do before we get really in depth into the fantasy football question style content, obviously lots of news has happened over the last week and 2 weeks, and it's been hit on by everyone on Twitter, the 672,000 other podcasts. So we like to just go through it as quick as we can. But the only real news today was Leonard Fournette, which I think most of us kind of saw coming anyway. I just want to ask you, Josh.
You got the perfect guy on for Fournette hype.
Oh yeah,
hype him up. He's definitely gonna be overdrafted now for sure.
By Josh.
What could be left in free agency outside of Baker being traded for the 7th round pick that he deserves? What could be left in free agency that'll surprise everybody?
So I think at this point, aside from Baker, it's really just what happens with that Green Bay receiver room. That's really the only thing I can see where people, at least fantasy gamers, will get excited about it, because the only other potential domino would be Garoppolo. I think that's going to happen a lot later. I think Lance's price is going to dip because of it. It's going to make for a nice buying opportunity. Since from what I've read about that Garoppolo surgery, he won't be able to throw for another 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
So it's actually, I mean, I wouldn't want to trade for him if I was a team, knowing that he's already not a great quarterback, and that he's not going to be throwing the football until what, June, July. So I think when that happens, that'll be some type of news where he goes. But at this point, it's basically just Baker and then I don't know, whoever ends up going to Green Bay to catch passes there, because right now, what is it? It's Randall Cobb. Did they re-sign Alan Lazard, or is that still not even happened?
I think it's in the air. I don't think they officially.
I don't know.
even think it officially
I
happened.
will ask his
brought
agent,
Tunyon
Dave
back.
Kluge.
Yeah, they brought Tunyon back.
Yeah,
They have Amari Rogers, who
God,
very
Special team
uninspiring.
extraordinaire.
that guy sucks.
Yeah.
I remember being so this is fun fact about my introduction to Player Profiler was that I loved Amari Rogers. I loved him. And then Jacob DM'd me his screenshot of his athletic testing, and then other people that tested that poorly. And I immediately went, I got to go on this site more because it's going to save me from drafting guys like Amari Rogers. And no doubt that's how I found the site, 100%. But even for the Green Bay Packers, I'm going to send this to Billy. Julio Jones, Jarvis Landry, Will Fuller, he's definitely going to Cleveland.
Yeah.
T.Y. Hilton, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, A.J. Green, Keelan Cole, Sammy Watkins. These are the free agent receivers and injured Odell. Like, who on here is really going to make you excited as a fan?
Not a lot. I'd love to see Julio in Green Bay. I'm always on the side of fun, and healthy Julio is a fun Julio. Unfortunately, a healthy Julio is about 40% of Julio nowadays. So I'd love to see him there. Jarvis, I mean, if Baker is that bad, Jarvis might still have some stuff in the tank. I mean, we picked up a first for Adams. I'm hoping finally we're going to draft a wide receiver in the first round. We almost
hopefully
have to
two.
at this
You better
point.
get two.
I don't know. I
They're not
can't
gonna
wait for us
take
to draft another cornerback. Like it's going to be so great, this draft show, where I have to bang my head into a wall. But all in all prospects point to us signing a vet, whoever that may be, maybe Julio. That'd be fun, and then just beefing up our wide receiver core for the future with draft picks.
It's not great, Bob. It's not
No,
great.
it's not.
I hope that Billy is wrong because I've already pre-ordered my Julio Jones Colts jersey. You get 50%
That was
off
a bold
discount
move.
if you order it before he actually signs with the team.
For
That's a
someone
joke.
who preaches economic moves, that seems
Well,
pretty bold.
it was a joke, Billy.
Yes, I get it. I get it. So was mine.
Oh, okay. This is okay. What you're doing now is you're like the guy who like posts something on Twitter and then gets like ratioed, and they're like, it was a joke, and then it's like, was it actually, or whatever.
We got
I have-
Jameson, FNL member here. DJ just dropped his latest mock, Olave and Dotson to Green Bay. You happy with
Love it.
that?
I mean,
Love it.
Yeah.
I would be so pumped with that just for the sake of content, right? Like, I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of like the analytics versus film wars on Twitter, like what would possibly be better than the
Constant.
two senior declare wide receivers
Undersized.
going to Aaron Rodgers in round one? Like, that's just incredible content.
Let's
And
burn it up.
I don't even necessarily know what my opinion would be on it yet, but I know it would be entertaining just to see people get really upset online. So I support that. I also just feel like just so much disrespect that Melvin Gordon has not been talked about yet. I've been like out here
Soon to be
standing
Denver
for Mel
Bronco.
Go for weeks. And I do think that's a big domino, both where he goes and what it says for Javonte. I think the longer he sits out there on the market, I think that the higher chance that maybe he returns to Denver. We got that initial report that it wasn't going to happen on the first day of free agency. And I think that was probably true at the time. But, who knows what's going on? Maybe he's been waiting out. Maybe he hasn't been getting the contract he wants. Maybe he returns and doubles back to Denver in a week or so if he continues to not get that. So that interests me.
If Gordon ends up with like a Chase Edmonds style contract, people are going to be very upset.
I mean, it really depends
In
where
Denver.
he goes. Like yeah, maybe. I mean, I still think
should've
it's
said that.
unlikely he signs in Denver, but I think it's more likely now than it was like 2 weeks ago. And I mean, I'm so interested to see where he goes. Like I'm kind of I still think it's possible he goes to like Buffalo. Like they've obviously wanted to add running backs. I'm not sure Duke Johnson is everything that they hoped and dreamed for. Chiefs have been awfully quiet. We'll see. I mean, I just think there's interesting spots still for Melvin.
Is Atlanta spending any money right now? I feel like they could throw $5 million at
Well,
Melvin
they have like
Gordon.
70 million in dead cap. So
Yeah, they got a lot of dead cap. They signed
Yeah.
Cordero. They signed Damian Williams. Also, like, I don't want Melvin to go to Atlanta. I don't want anyone in Atlanta right now. Like, it's just a depressing place.
What a waste.
Marcus
But
Mariota, baby.
Let's talk quick about Fournette, because we have Josh here as like the
Okay.
perfect pro Fournette person, and I put out my Fournette thoughts today and got a lot of people very upset about it. As people often get emotionally invested in Leonard Fournette debates on one side or the other, and every alternating year the other side is correct. So we really just trade them off.
So fucking true.
So my take on Fournette is, like, if you're buying Fournette prior to this, like, obviously that's just a massive win, and it was probably sharp to do so because it was always likely that he would sign. It was always like he would end up in a spot where he'd have a big workload, and especially coming back, like, he just has this nut fantasy role, right? Last year, I mean, if you're playing DFS, like, he was often the highest projecting running back on the slate, you know, up close to Jonathan Taylor, just in terms of the goal line touchdown expectancy, how often he gets targets. It's just awesome. I just like have literally, I couldn't possibly have less interest in paying his redraft price. Like, I would be stunned if he's not going around the 1-2 turn, just based on like big projection, as Ben called it last week, the projection industrial complex. They've started to come out with their initial projections. They have him inside the top 10, which makes sense. He probably should be projected inside the top 10. But we talked last week about sort of my feelings on running back projections, and there's just so much fragility with Leonard. Yes, he got signed in the perfect spot. It wasn't a massive contract, $7 million AAV, kind of similar to the almost exact same as the Connor contract. Similar
it's a 2-year contract,
average annual value to the Evans contract, albeit with an extra year, and quite similar to like the Chris Carson contract from last year. So to me, that's not impervious to them still adding someone in the draft or looking for supplementary talent. And Fournette, like, he has a really fantasy friendly skill set in terms of what he's able to do. He still has never been actually a value adder on his touches. He's never had a season in the top 35 of yards created per touch. He's never had a season in the top 20 of juke rates. Career high is 24. And he's a person where even in this one season of his career, we had over 20 expected fantasy points per game back in his last year in Jacksonville. He was at 17. So basically his entire fantasy production is tied to whatever his workload is, because he's not adding fantasy points really on his opportunities. So to me, like, if he's drafted at that projected price, to take in the existing fragility that exists with any running back's injury potential, add in the age fragility, add in, to me, what's just like talent fragility compared to other running backs going in that range. And it seems just really gross to me to pay that big of an opportunity cost for Lenny. But I'm interested to see what you guys say, because I'm the Lenny hater. And, you know, we had this fight about Lenny like 2 years ago, and then last year with Zeke, and I guess I'm back to Lenny now.
Josh?
So before I dive into Fournette, I just want to get this take on the air. It's been marinating. I think Tyler Lockett traded to the Packers. Good for both sides.
Nice. I like that.
He can play in the slot. He can
like
play outside. And I think Rodgers would love him. Just a receiver that does everything well. Very no nonsense. So I like that fit. When it comes to Fournette, here is what I love about Leonard Fournette. And I totally understand, not the most efficient guy with any advanced metric. There's really nothing that makes him look good aside from knowing that he gets goal line carries and targets. But here's what I think people need to remember about Leonard Fournette is that he is trusted by Tom Brady. And if I were to choose one person on this earth to say, here is my favorite talent evaluator, I know Drew always chooses Lance Zierlein. It's a great pick. I personally would choose Tom Brady. I would say he's been in the league a long time. He's seen a lot of players at every position. He decided last year that Leonard Fournette was the guy he wanted out there on pretty much every snap. The most important drives of the game, the least important drives of the game, it didn't matter. He wanted Fournette by his side. And to me, that's a very ringing endorsement. And yes, I can look at the stats, and he's kind of a conundrum where you're like, wow, this guy's inefficient. He's going to lose his job. But he got the contract. It's enough money that he looks like the entrenched starter. And if Tom Brady likes him, that's what I'm going to defer to. So I'm curious where his price ends up going. And like, I found out about the Fournette news this morning because someone in a league of mine in Dynasty offered me the 204. and they were going to, and I was going to give up Fournette and my third. And I was like, what the heck is this? Why did I get this offer? And I was like, oh, he just signed in Tampa Bay. Like, haha, sucker. Like, nope. So that's kind of my take, is that if Brady trusts him, I have to see kind of where he goes, but I don't think the 1-2 turn is crazy for him. Just thinking about the running back landscape right now and kind of which players are going there in drafts, it's like Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris. I mean, neither of those guys are players that I love. I mean, Joe Mixon, who I do like, since I think his situation is getting so much better this next year. But if you just think about those running backs, like Najee Harris, he's going to be getting fewer dump offs probably with Trubisky. The offense could be horrible again. No, just not an efficient player either. Dalvin Cook, he's getting older. He can't stay healthy either. The offense isn't as good. He doesn't catch as many passes. And it's like, oh, suddenly you kind of make a case. And it's like, yeah, Mixon catches some passes, but isn't the full third down back.
P-Ryan, baby.
With what should be a much improved offensive line. And all of a sudden you're like, you know what? Fournette suddenly looks better than all the other running back candidates for that area. And yes, I think that you could just say, you know what? I'm avoiding it. I'm going with, give me Kelsey at the turn or give me receivers. And you say, I don't really want the risk of running back. I understand that. But I think in terms of looking at which running backs I think are clearly better than Fournette, there's really not many. And if you told me Jonathan Taylor at the 101 or Fournette at the 1-2 turn, I would much rather have Fournette at the 1-2 turn when he actually has.
Well, you know that I don't take Taylor at the 101. You've been in enough best ball drafts with me.
I know you're McCaffrey 101. So it just seems to me like when I think about the landscape, like you have to draft a running back at some point. No, I don't think that's the best cost for him. Like I loved getting Fournette later, since it just seemed like he was going to go back to the Bucs. It's because Tom Brady, that's who he wants. So that I just think when you think about it in terms of which running backs you prefer when you have to take running backs, he does seem like a really nice anchor RB type build running back where you grab him and say, this guy stays healthy. We know that he's going to have a fantasy friendly role in a top 3 offense in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And I found myself in like these two parallel arguments, which was really strange, where like I was arguing with half the replies to my tweet saying like, you're an idiot for not drafting Fournette. And then the other half were like, you're an idiot. He's not going to be drafted at the 1-2 turn. And I like simultaneously found myself defending why he would be drafted really highly and also why I wouldn't draft him, which is like a very weird position to be in.
Put you in an odd state of flux.
But I guess like my stance is just that like ADP tends to follow projections, especially as we get closer to the season. And I think that he'll project super highly. Like in week 1 DFS, like he'll probably be a top 5 projected running back play. And I think that will make him a very expensive redraft pick. And I just don't put as much emphasis on projections in terms of my draft philosophy, which is why I end up with the position that I do. But like, I mean, if everybody ends up feeling like, oh, Fournette grows still, like if that's still a sentiment that's out there, then maybe I will end up with more of him. I will make this point. We're a Dynasty show, of course, primarily, even though we're now sponsored by Underdog. And like I had this going back with Mike Liu, and I am probably more inclined to target Fournette in Dynasty because like he has this, and Connor actually falls into this category too, of like guys who feel gross. And I would know because I'm usually the one saying these guys are gross. But guys who feel gross, like in this range, I just think are actually undervalued in Dynasty relative to their redraft cost, in the sense of like, we'll see where it all shakes out, but I expect that Fournette and Connor end up going like comfortably ahead of like Zeke and Aaron Jones in redraft, and then probably behind, but like barely behind, or at least amongst like Cook and Mixon. And let's say Kamara gets announced with no suspension, like in that range. And then in Dynasty, I expect that's probably going to be like more grouped or even behind Zeke and Jones, but like well behind Cook and Kamara and Mixon and Eckler and that stuff. And that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, I think that if you're like, why is that the case? Because there's more sticking power based on like Cook. Like if your argument's based on long-term, like you're just shopping like completely in the wrong asset class. If you're talking about 26, 27, 28-year-old running backs, like if you're already talking about 26-plus-year-old running backs, your real argument should be who's going to score the most points this year, in my opinion. Like it shouldn't be like about their long-term future. So yeah, I would be way more inclined to just kind of get like a discount Dalvin Cook and just go get Fournette in Dynasty. Like, what's the highest rookie pick you'd give for Fournette in a Dynasty league right now?
Ooh, what would I give for him?
Yeah, like obviously you're a contender. If you're not a contender, I mean,
I
you
would
shouldn't be
chalk up
trading
a
for
204. I'd chalk up a 204 or 203 for Fournette on my contending
That's
dynasty
your
roster.
highest early.
That's
two?
probably as
I
high
think
as
I think
go.
I'd go like 201, maybe
Yeah,
112. I think I'd go around that turn pick, just looking at who's going to be available there this year.
I have
Am
all
I
my
a guy on
112s reserved
Fournette?
for Allen
I think
Robinson.
I'm
I was gonna say 112 to 110.
I was gonna say 110.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I could be sold on that. I think with Fournette,
I have
so
him
the
in
way that
FPL,
I
by the
look at
way.
running backs in Dynasty,
Depends though. Like I have to have a hole there.
I think pretty much every running back I look at as having a 2-year window in Dynasty. And then there's very few ultra elite, super premium young backs that have more than a 2-year window. It's like Taylor Swift, Najee Harris, like they're Javonte Williams. What are there, like 5-6 running backs that you could argue have more than a 2-year window? And then basically everyone else has a 2-year window. And in that 2-year window, outside of the super backs that are really young, Fournette's got to be like one of the 2 or 3 best for that archetype. So then I'm like, well, if I'm looking in the next 2 years, Fournette's going to be there probably for 2 years. He should be pretty much at the top of that list, but he's not. And I think that's why he's such an outrageous buy, is that he's probably going to outproduce Dalvin Cook the next 2 years. I would expect it based on what the Vikings look like, what the Buccaneers look
so
like.
then he should be ranked above him, period.
Yeah. So I think that's
Dalvin Cook in 3 years won't be in the NFL.
Yeah, Cook's probably going to be out of the NFL in 2 years.
If he's in the NFL, he's not useful. Like
I've already shipped off Dalvin Cook for Leonard Fournette at 23-1 today. So I was
that's
incredible.
insane. That's like
Pretty
that's
insane.
an amazing trade.
Right? Like
people see Dalvin Cook and they go, "Oh, this explosive, amazing
Yeah.
player." And Leonard Fournette is always casted with this like he's very mid, not an athlete, and he sucks. I just want to go
that's wild to me. I think everyone should do that. Like try and target Fournette and Connor
easily.
from like Cook or from Cook or Mixon or these guys, like these veteran guys, because to me that's where the value is. If you tell me like, oh, I'm already stacked at running back, or I'm building like a younger build or whatever, like there's plenty of reasons to not want to roster a 28-year-old Leonard Fournette in Dynasty, but I like Dalvin Cook like a lot more is not a good one in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. Look, the last thing I wanted to say is that I found it hilarious. I just want to spend a minute on this because I think it needs to be said. Urban Meyer's, like the report or the article that came out about Urban Meyer not knowing who Aaron Donald is, and then talking trash about John Brown because the Southern boys don't get it or whatever he said. Like I can't believe how bad it went for him, and I personally think it's gonna make screening the college coaches coming up like I think a deeper not knowing who Aaron Donald is just hilarious. Quick thoughts from everyone if you want. If not, we can roll on.
If it's true that he didn't know who Aaron Donald is, which I have no reason to believe it was true, I have no reason to believe it wasn't true. If that is true, that is hands down the funniest thing I've heard in a very long time. It probably won't be touched.
It goes right up there with Russell Wilson saying that God gave him a right hand to throw deep to everyone but Jerry Jr.
Yeah. Like if my
if
I was having a Super Bowl party and my uncle walked in and was like, "Oh damn, who's that 99 guy on the Rams? He's really pushing him around." I would expect that. I'm like, dude, that's the biggest defensive guy in the league. But no, it's the coach of the Jaguars saying that while he's the coach.
Yeah.
Even if he was like, I'm a college coach, I don't watch NFL, I'd allow it. He's in the NFL.
It's pretty abysmal. Look, we're gonna take a quick second. Okay, because you guys need a break from all of our voices. We're gonna take a quick second. I'm gonna play a clip from our show with Pat Dougherty, which you can catch on YouTube at our network and the Dynasty Vipers network and on Apple and all those other fun places where you get the shows. We come back. Jacob's gonna tune you into a little bit of underdog knowledge, and we're gonna get into the heavy hitter questions here with our special guest today, Josh Larky. So sit tight. As I mentioned, here's our show with Pat Dougherty. I just find it amazing that the NFL is so bad with technology for like a multi-billion-dollar industry with a bunch of MIT students as interns probably horrifically underpaid, that they
Yes.
can't sync their data to what's happening in real time. Like they
It
were
is
like,
bizarre.
the next gen stats combining live numbers and from their production and what we see on film for grades, can't get a 40 time down straight. Like, just completely unbelievable. Yeah, a little later we're going to play a clip on how Billy fixes the combine. So I have that queued up. Jacob, why don't you let the people know all about Underdog today?
Well, look, I was recently at a party, and they were like, "Oh, like, what do you do?" And I was like, "I'm a law student." And then they were like, "Oh, weird, capitalism." And then I was like, "Oh, but I also have this fun side hustle." And then I talked about like doing fantasy podcasting, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, but the games are all on Sunday. Like, how many leagues are you in?" Well, and I was like, "Oh, like I'm in several redraft leagues." And I was like, "But I do like a ton of best ball leagues. Like I do over like a
5,000.
couple hundred best ball leagues." And they were like, "How do you do that? Like the games start at 10 a.m. on Sunday. How do you set all of your lineups? You live on the West Coast." And I say, I don't have to do that because I use Underdog Fantasy. And so I get to just do these drafts. And then every day I do a draft. I sit on the bus home from work. I do a draft. I'm bored at work. I do a draft. I can't find a date on a Saturday night because my Hinge isn't finding me set up a success. So I sit home and do a draft. And then I just get small wins every day. I sit at work and I'm like, oh man, I should be doing this thing for a client. And then I get a tweet alert that says Jamison Crowder signs with the Buffalo Bills. And then I go to my exposure and I see like 35% Crowder because I'm a total cuck beta. And then I'm like, wow, I just like won a little bit of expected value today. And so why would you spend your time getting up at 5 a.m. to set lineups, right? Trying to make decisions of who to start between Gerald Everett or Alberto Cuebanam or David Njoku, when you could just have this blissful existence of doing drafts, but you can't get a date. And then all of a sudden waking up and seeing that Jamison Crowder just made you like 3 Satoshis of expected value overnight by signing with Josh Allen. Get on Underdog today. Use promo code Full Tilt.
That's right. If you use promo code Full Tilt, you've never played before. They, of course, match your deposit up to $100. It goes beyond.
I told Tom, by the way, that I was going to use my creative liberties when he sent me this ridiculous template. And then Tom got mad at me. And then this is the result of letting me do the ad.
Oh, I liked it. This was good. I think the stories are always best. My pet peeve is the podcasters that are like, and now let me do a totally different voice and they speed read through this promo. And I'm like, the company's going to stop paying you.
Yeah.
That's how you're reading your promos. Like, it sounds like the end of those medical commercials and they're like, side effects may include, and it's like everything including death. And it's like, so this is why, and they're like, but this is the medication where if your heart rate was here, we wanted it to be here, but you might die. But
have you ever wanted to quit smoking? Well, now you can. Side effects may include certain death, depression, anxiety. Yeah, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Josh, you're a man that has a ton of experience doing what you're doing, and you do everything from coding to you name it, analytics, best ball. I know you're on the TikTok streets talking best ball and draft values all the time, which also shout out on the TikTok views because those are not easy to get. And you've definitely found your pocket that's working. So shout out to you.
Incredible.
You're on my for you page every time. I did see your Jalen Hurts TikTok, which I appreciated because Hurts is dope. One thing that comes with working with Player Profiler is kind of a stigma, and we did talk with this a little bit with Austin Gale, so I wanted to get your opinion as well, because when Pro Football Focus puts out something, it is a lightning rod for controversy all the time. And I feel like Player Profiler also kind of has that reputation that when you guys post a picture of the bar graph, and that's in all, I'm in so many group chats that just post, oh, the bar graph is at it again. When it comes to living by the bar graph, why do you think that people just assume that that is your, as a company, as yourself, your guys's, like, if it's not on the bar graph, I don't care at all, but yet here you are talking about Leonard Fournette? So I just wanted to know, why do you think that is, and how do you apply things like changes of scenery and players getting older to their original bar graph?
So I think it just kind of goes back to this universal concept that people fear the unknown. You see it across every industry. You see it in politics. You see it in people's friendships. Just there's in economics, there's no way to avoid it. People are afraid of the unknown.
Mhm.
And when you dive in and you understand the numbers more and take the time to better understand the bar graph, you realize it's not that scary and that it's just a piece of the puzzle, and that I am in no way bound to the bar graph. There's guys with really good looking bar graphs that I hate. There's guys with bad looking bar graphs that I love. I mean, I'm a Charger fan, and Keenan Allen has to have one of the worst bar graphs ever when he runs a mid 4.7 as a receiver. So I think it's kind of just that fear of the unknown and people just not quite understanding how to use that data. It's just like with film grinders, when like the misconception I think with film grinders is like, oh, you're just watching YouTube highlights. And it's like, well, I'm sure there are some film grinders that only watch YouTube highlights.
Mhm.
Just like I'm sure there's some quote unquote analysts that see a bar graph and they're like, well, there, let's just rank the players by this bar graph. And oh, here, these are my rankings. I might
Here's
switch
this
these two
scatter
guys.
plot.
Yeah, like oh, this scatter plot is basically my rankings now. And I think that there are the very extreme individuals on both ends, the film, the analytics side. I think they just kind of give it a bad name. I'm not a prisoner to the bar graph. Do I use them more than most people? Yes, that's my skill set, is that I'm better with numbers than most people, or else then everyone would have my job. So I hope that I can be above average with the bar graph, or else I'm getting paid for absolutely no reason. So I think it's
Prisoner
just,
to the
it's a
Bar
piece of
Graph
the
was
puzzle.
actually an unwritten novel by Dostoevsky.
I'm gonna say that's my punk rock band from the late 2000s.
Prisoner of the bar. So I really think it just goes back. It's fear of the unknown, and people, if they're like, oh, I haven't seen this before, it's just like when I first found out that there were people that did nothing aside from watch film, immediately I was like, oh God, like I certainly couldn't do that. I played a little football when I was younger. I've watched football on TV. Do I think that I could just start breaking down schemes and watching a single player and then immediately know where he stacks up compared to other players based on watching him run a route or take a carry? No, that's not my skill set. So I might be more inclined then to be like, oh, they're just watching highlights or something. But when you really dig into the process, or when you learn more about my process, you realize that, do I use the bar graph? Yes. Is that my only process? No. And it's like with Leonard Fournette. Does he have pretty bad advanced metrics? Absolutely. Do I still draft a lot of Leonard Fournette and value him generally above consensus? Absolutely. And it's because there's other factors at play. So I think that's what I would say to all the people that are like, oh, it's just a bar graph. No, I will not be prisoner to the bar graph.
I think that's important. Perception to that is really, really important. And I'll say that for me, I played a fairly high competitive level for Canada of football. And one of the things Jake and I used to talk about when we just started talking football with one another at the baseball diamond was I didn't like this player because of how they looked, and then how they looked. And then when I got onto Twitter, I saw that was the only focus. And I went, oh no, like I'm not going to venture into that, because even having watched and actually had to break down film, there's no fucking way I'd be able to tell you who's going to be a first round lock pick because of how they ran routes in college. One other question I wanted that I asked there: how do you apply, let's say just in process, whether your drafts or whatever, how do you choose which players, like Keenan Allen, as you mentioned, where you ignore the bar graph and apply him to your ranks? How do you combine your analytic mind and the bar graph to players like that are seemingly complete outsiders to process?
So I'll generally keep my process fairly rooted in data, but the way that I kind of stray from just the straight up bar graph is with someone like Keenan Allen. He has what looks like a junior college type 40 time. He runs mid 4.7s, and he's a big receiver. I think he's 6'2", 6'3", but it's not like he's not some
Underratedly
Chase
large.
Claypool.
Like I think people think that he's smaller than he is.
Yeah, I think because he plays slot.
They
They just assume that he's tiny.
He's a monster, yeah.
He's a big receiver, but he's not that big. Overall, just very poor athleticism on paper. But with someone like Keenan Allen, there's other data points you can look at, like his absolutely ridiculous production in college, that he got drafted round 1. And why I love draft capital is that is how I, a non-film grinder, can masquerade as a film grinder. The draft capital is often it's a film grade, basically. The film people, the team decided that they wanted to see that guy from the film on their team in the NFL. So I can use the draft capital. I'm like, oh, he got decent enough draft capital. He was ridiculously productive in college. He's got the right size. Now we have some data points in the NFL, and it's like, oh, he's getting targeted at a very high rate per route. The overall target share is really good. And then when you look at pretty much everything else, he stacks up really well. And I think that that's really important. Is I'll do a ton of little mini data experiments with different players when I'm a little bit unsure of what to think. So an example could be if there's a new metric out there and someone's like, hey, I have this new metric that I think is really good. And then I'm going to test it. I'm never just going to blindly take something and be like, oh, great. Thanks for telling me here's the little secret sauce. I'm going to use this now. I always like to just do some kind of quick experiments where I'm like, all right, let's just subset the data this way. And let's see, all right, based on this metric, do the players start to look okay? If there's some good players, some bad players, I'm like, maybe we need another data point to mix in where it's like, it's like for receiver, people talk about early declare, and I can say, all right, cool. Let's look at early declare versus non-early declare. And like, yes, you'll see that most of the good receivers in the NFL were early declares. Does that mean that if you're not an early declare, there's no way you can be good? No, because if you start looking at the non-early declares, sometimes you'll see, oh, there's this strange pattern where a lot of those guys were small school guys, and it's just hard to get noticed after 3 years at the small school.
Yeah.
So maybe I say, you know what? I can forgive you a little bit more if you're a non-early declare at a small school. Whereas if you're a big school non-early declare, I'm like, you know what? The whole world knew about you and you still stayed an extra year. That's a red flag to me. And I think that those types of thought experiments are basically what I'm doing. And then I'll just pull up data to either confirm or deny those thought experiments, and I'll move along kind of iteratively from there.
Yeah.
I think that that's something that I think more people should be doing when they consider themselves on the analytics front, is that if you want to be a film grinder, you should strive to be more than just the highlight reel film watcher. And then if you consider yourself to be more analytics focused, that you should be doing a lot of these experiments, and that you should never just take, if you yourself want to be in the spreadsheets or be in the code, that you shouldn't just be taking people at face value and going, oh yeah, I believe that. Because when you actually do the research yourself, it's when you yourself will be like, oh my God, here's an outlier. Or here's a really strange trend where your eyes and your knowledge of football and your knowledge of what you've known with the data comes into play. And it's your unique creativity where you go, okay, the data is not quite looking how I thought it would look. Just like with Keenan Allen, I'm like, this 40 time sticks out like a sore thumb. And then you start to do more digging and more research, and then you can either explain it away or you can't explain it away. And I think that type of process is really important for everyone to do, because if you're not doing your own full process, you're probably missing out and not even taking advantage of your own creativity to its fullest potential.
I think that, like you said the word outlier at the end, and I loved everything you just said. I think outlier is one of the most overused terms and like misused terms in the football space. Like when people say, so I think there's a big difference between someone being an outlier in the sense of like, if this player hits X amount of points, they are an outlier. And then I think when some people say outlier, what they really should say is, actually, there's one part of this person's profile that's an outlier compared to the rest of the profile. Like, so I have like, I remember people this year have been saying like, man, like, when will we stop listening to these data people? Devontae Smith hit last year and he was an outlier. It's like, there are elements of Devontae Smith's profile that were outlier-esque in the sense that he was very skinny, in the sense that like, I don't even know if being a senior declare would like be considered an outlier, because there's like tons of senior declare successes, but it's like makes you like a little bit less likely to hit.
You won the Heisman. That's an outlier.
Right. Yeah. But it's like the idea that like Devontae Smith hitting is like a completely unforeseeable outcome was like, it's ridiculous. Like that's not the case. Like the vast majority of analytically based people had him either wide receiver 2 or 3 or 4. Like I'm aware of, like he was a good prospect. He produced a crap ton. Keenan Allen, similar example where it's like, okay, he's an outlier based on his 40 time. Like that's very weird. But in the sense, like it's already an outlier that a player with that kind of 40 time gets drafted on day 2. And then we're going to have this conversation again with Wandale. Like we'll see where his draft capital ends up. But like Wandale hitting at 5 feet 8 inches, if the only thing we knew about him was that he was 5 feet 8 inches, would look like an outlier. In the context of his whole profile, his profile is actually quite good. And that's definitely something that I think is interesting in terms of this outlier. Like if, I don't know, name like just a really unproductive, like nothing player. I'm trying to think of, okay, if Willis Jones
KJ
Jr.
Hamler.
Well, no, KJ Hamler had a phenomenal prospect profile, and one day he will hit maybe. If Willis Jones Jr. like hits this year, like that's actually an outlier because he like didn't exist on a football field until he was like 23, and now he's older than Juju Smith-Schuster, and he's gonna be a rookie. Like that would be.
But he's faster than Juju.
That's true. Like that would be an extremely outlier result if like he hits, and there are outliers, right? But I just think people like sometimes really misuse like what it means to be an outlier. Like if Wandale goes in round 3 and hits, like that's not actually weird. That's like totally normal.
Kind of expected.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I'll add to this is that people talk about stuff like aging curves all the time. And like, yes, you can kind of blanket apply an aging curve. And it's like, this is when a guy is supposed to get good and get better and then decline. But I think that one thing that I've realized is that aging curves kind of depend on how good the player is. And like, yes, there's going to be some arbitrary nature to who you define as a good player, bad player. But if you just look at good receivers, they're not going to age like bad receivers, at least not in the NFL. If you look at bad receivers, they're aging out of the league by 24, 25, 26. Really good receivers are hitting their stride at age 26. And there's different things there where you could be like, oh, like Larry Fitzgerald. Yes, he was an outlier, but should we have expected him to fall off a cliff at age 31 just because a lot of other receivers did? Not really. Based on how he was winning in his style of play, no, we shouldn't expect it. Same with Antonio Brown. If Antonio Brown was, I've said this before on a few podcasts, and I don't even think it's a hot take. I'm like, if Antonio Brown was not a head case, he would be a top 5 dynasty receiver last year. Yeah. When people were talking about how to value Antonio Brown, I was like, oh, he looks like the kind of player that's going to have top 5 seasons kind of in perpetuity, and that we haven't even seen any inkling that he's declining.
He was possibly the best wide receiver in the NFL last year when he was healthy. He's insane and he got hurt, but he was like literally like incredible.
Yeah, like I wouldn't even think twice. He'd be in my consideration in the second round of a dynasty startup if I knew that he had, we talked about Lockett before, just a man of the people. If he had Tyler Lockett's disposition, he'd be a second round startup pick.
Can Antonio Brown find God?
Seriously. He's been calling God. We just need him to find him.
Oh my God.
Talking to him a little too much.
Yeah, I keep drafting him, by the way. I've been in these startups. I don't stop drafting him. Just, you never know. Like, I mean, if we're giving $230 million guaranteed to Deshaun Watson, like you're telling me a team can't give like a $2 million tryout deal to AB? Like it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
I
Green Bay Packers.
I think we'll see him play again. I definitely
it's worth a 25th round startup pick if you ask me. Because every time he steps on the football field, we should expect like 18 points.
I took him in the league we're in, that Dave Kluge Invitational League.
Yeah,
took him in like the
Twitter,
second last round. I just feel like, I'm the same way. I'm like, you know what? That when you're that late in the startup, you're dropping that dude. He's getting rotated with the waiver wire within the first few weeks of the season. At least with Antonio Brown, there's a chance that he's actually cracking your starting lineup. Pretty much nobody else in that range has any type of realistic probability of doing that. Antonio Brown needs one thing to go right. He needs a team to sign him. Pretty much every other guy you're drafting that range, you need like 6-7 different things to snowball. And then it's like, okay, now I'll consider starting this guy in my flex this week.
Signs like he's an automatically wide receiver.
It's a lot more likely that Antonio Brown finds God than KJ Hamler finds your wide receiver 2 slot at this point.
Then Russell Wilson finds KJ Hamler.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I mean, I have so many Hamler shares because I already drafted a bunch of Hamler when he was a rookie because he was like a really good prospect, and then or at least a really productive prospect. So in my sense, that means good. And then he went in the second round, but then nobody liked him because he got drafted behind Judy and Sutton was already there. So he was like the second round, like ultra productive prospect that was getting drafted in round 3 of rookie drafts. So I just kept drafting Hamler. And then last year I was like, well, that didn't work, but he's even cheaper now. So I guess I'll just keep drafting Hamler. And then that didn't work. But now I'm sitting here with like 60% KJ Hamler exposure. And it's like, I'm not going to drop him. And now they just got Russell Wilson. So it's like, if he could just get like any of the 3 people in front of him to get injured, then he'll get to play a lot of snaps with the best deep ball thrower potentially of the last like 20 years. And you can tell yourself a story of how KJ Hamler will go 5 for 132 and 2 touchdowns. And then you can sell him for a late second round pick one day. That's the story that I tell myself every night.
I love that you've you've constructed this path to Hamler becoming a success for you. I love that.
Going back to Antonio Brown, I just think it's a fun game to play. If he didn't storm off that field as a Jets player, just played out the rest of the season as a fine player, doesn't sign with the Bucks, goes somewhere random, we can put him anywhere we want. Where are we drafting him right now? Legitimately.
Highly. Like I'd be drafting
as Josh just said. Josh just said he'd take him in the second round of a startup if he's.
Yeah, I would draft him at least in the third, like sight unseen. I would draft him in the third round of any like best ball draft, because I mean last year he was like clearly, when all 3 were healthy, he was the best wide receiver on the Bucs on a team with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and Rob Gronkowski, and he was averaging like 30% targets per route run at a ridiculous yards per route run, and was like getting like a 90 PFF grade. He was phenomenal. And almost anywhere he went other than the Bucs, he would probably be competing with worse wide receivers than Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. And like, I know people would say like, oh, Tom Brady was just force feeding him because they're buddies. Like, Tom Brady really doesn't force feed anybody. If anything, he force feeds running backs by just like continuously dumping down to them more than any quarterback in the world. Like, he doesn't really force feed people. And then if you just look into the numbers, like, no, Antonio Brown just got open like at ridiculously high rates constantly. And I'm pretty sure that whatever team he plays on, if he ever plays football again, he will also get open at ridiculously high rates, like he's done every time he's ever stepped on a football field.
Yeah, I think before the Devontae Adams trade, if I were to put Antonio Brown on any other team, I think the Packers with Adams and Rodgers would be the only team where I'd be fairly certain he wouldn't be the target leader. I think every other team, he has a strong case. Even the Vikings, I think there's a good case for him potentially out-targeting Jefferson, where at least it's a conversation. I think the only time it wouldn't be a conversation is if Adams was still on the Packers and AB went there. I think Adams has more targets. Basically, every other situation, I think it's a real conversation, and I don't know. I could really see Antonio Brown having the most targets per game on this roster. So that's why I think that if he's just the perfect late round dynasty pick right now, he's a great late round best ball pick right now, because the second he goes anywhere, if it happens, like you said, he's probably a 3rd, 4th round redraft pick, where if we knew he wasn't a head case, he'd be a round 1, round 2 turn pick in redraft. But because he's a head case, he's probably going to go in the 3rd or 4th round.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the 20 rounds now added in best ball. Like, who are you picking with your last pick? Like Anthony Schwartz? Like you're every wide receiver
KJ
available
Hamler.
in the last 2 rounds. Yeah, KJ Hamler, a great example. That like every wide receiver you're drafting in the last 2 rounds is like on Windsprint Island. Like, so you may as well take a shot at AB.
I'd say Will Fuller, but Jacob's definitely taking him 5 rounds earlier than
Will Fuller has a round 11 ADP, and he's significantly undervalued.
We're handing out.
If Will Fuller ends up on the Browns, that's so perfect, because
he's signing there.
Because if he ends up on the Browns, like, he's better than Amari Cooper, and he will out-target Amari Cooper.
In the 5 games he plays, he absolutely will.
Yeah, Amari Cooper's career high target share does not sniff Will Fuller's target share. Well,
yeah, I'm just saying it'll be in the 5 games
and then I will when this does happen, and I hope it does, I will have the definitive tail of the tape Amari Cooper versus Billy Needles on playerprofiler.com. I look forward to making that a
I just look forward to him
down on Fuller. It's like there's like, I have, what am I sitting at, 19? I have 6 cards in my hand. I'm like, hit me, dealer. Just keep hitting me. Just like Will Fuller
I think Will Fuller would be
steroid.
dope.
Just keep hitting me.
Will Fuller's going to be dope while it's warm, and the minute it turns a little bit cold in Cleveland, both hamstrings are going to explode. And whatever problem you have with his finger that kept him out all year, the two
He's the
problem.
opposite of Darryl.
We're gonna
He'll get back on the gas. It'll be fine.
we need him to. Pro cheating, right? Look, we're gonna take a quick second. We got another clip from our show with Pat Dowdy. We come back. We got one or two more questions left for Josh before we have to send him on his way for the rest of the day out there in the West Coast. So sit tight. Here's another clip from our show with Pat Dowdy that you can find again on the Full Tilt YouTube network and the Dynasty Vipers YouTube network. Sit tight.
I feel like the combine needs like a change. Like it's become very popular, and I think that's a great thing. But I think a lot of times these players, like they've been on their feet, they've been doing interviews all days. The athletic training is at 7 p.m. at night. Like I want
That's dumb.
Yeah, I want first off, I want it at like as soon as they wake up. I want them to choose when they're going to run. Everything good. I want all that. Also, just 1 year, I want them to run it in pads. Just do it, then do it without, and see if the trends are the same. Like if people are as fast in pads. That's all I want.
You're saying Dry Archer would have never happened if they had run in pads? Is that what you're saying?
Probably not.
Can we get like an XFL like shoot for the ball drill? Just something. Yeah, it's something else.
That's
Something.
a bad idea.
Billy, I'd love to see them run it in pads. As someone who's run those stupid combine drills at really stupid hours, because they used to make us run it in high school, like pre-university, before we used to do workouts with the Manitoba Bison. They were always at the worst times. You ran it, then you took a lunch break, then you had to come out and re-stretch, and then run a bunch more. I couldn't imagine being there till 11:30 and having somebody want me to do a freaking agility drill. No, thank you. But running it in pads, I just think that would be must-see TV.
I just want it once. If we do it once and it's the exact same, we never have to do it again.
I love that.
I just want to see it.
Look, one thing I definitely wanted to ask, because I love your takes, Josh, on how you build your teams, whether in Dynasty and Fantasy. And I thought maybe I'd be able to sneak this one in. I want to talk about teams being clueless, like NFL teams being absolutely clueless. Why do you think teams with access to all of the advanced data that all of us have, and probably stuff that we don't even get to look at, consistently make the worst possible decisions, Baker Mayfield, imaginable for their teams, and set themselves back 3-4 years all the time? I don't care, Billy. I had to get a Baker shot in there. You can be confused all you want.
Trapped ahead of Josh Rosen. I think it's fine.
Nah.
So I think that I have kind of a unique perspective on this because I have the baseball analytics background. I used to work for two teams, and all my opinions on fantasy football are informed by my baseball analytics career that kind of came before I took fantasy seriously. And one of the biggest changes that are differences that I've seen between baseball and football is that in baseball, when management takes over a new team or when management decides to rebuild, there's this understanding of how long the process takes. And if a GM inherits a team or a coach goes to a bad team, it's understood that it's not a 1 or 2 year process. It's often more than that. The NFL, it's still very archaic. And I think a lot of it boils down to these GMs have such an uncertain window. And if you just look around the NFL, there's only a handful of GMs that have contract certainty and role security for the next 3 years. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is that they do these kind of fake skinny rebuilds, or, oh, I think we don't need to tear it down, that the fans won't like it, or my job is insecure, so we need to make sure that at least we win 6 games this year or 7 games this year. When really, what does that do for your franchise? What have the Atlanta Falcons gained from this? It looks like now the Falcons are rebuilding, yet they had this unbelievably painful multi-year stretch where they refused to rebuild. And now they're still going to have the unbelievably painful multi-year stretch of a rebuild at minimum. That's just assuming that now they do it right. And I think that's just what it all boils down to, is that there's not this job security. And that's why you see teams make really bad moves where it's going to hamstring their future. But at least for this season, I mean, Jacob knows it all too well as a Colts fan. How many quarterbacks they've had where they always have a decent enough roster to compete, but you don't really think of them as a true Super Bowl contender. These are the types of decisions that can hurt a franchise where you look and you go, oh, you know what? This team, do they have a young elite quarterback or do they have an elite quarterback? If it's no to both, sorry, it's not going to work out for you. And we see it with, I think the Vikings are a good example. Kirk Cousins
Panthers.
is a good quarterback. He's definitely above average.
Panthers.
But he does not seem like the type of quarterback where if you're paying him similar money to what an actually elite quarterback makes, or when you look and see that he's making 4 or 5 times the amount of money that a Herbert or a Burrow's making, how is that team realistically supposed to compete? It's just such a crazy disadvantage that you're starting with. And it seems to me like if GMs, everyone that worked for the team outside of ownership was told, you have this 4 to 5 year window and it's okay. If you don't like a quarterback in this upcoming draft class, we're going to suck for 1 more year and we're going to get a high pick for the next year's draft class. And then we'll take a good quarterback. And that if you're building the team that way, where it's like, what do all these good teams have? That's what we want to get. And we're going to be patient about it. So like with the Lions, I think so far they've rebuilded well. My worry is that they're going to take Malik Willis at 2. Do I think Malik Willis can be a good NFL quarterback? Yes. Do I think that probability is lower than a lot of other guys that would go in the top 5 in the NFL draft? Mm-hmm. Also, yes. If I worked for the Lions, what I would say is, hey, yes, Malik Willis is tempting. Could he be one of the better NFL quarterbacks? Sure. But that is a lower probability outcome. The 2023 quarterback class looks way better. Let's ride with Jared Goff 1 more year. We're going to be bad again. And then we're going to take a much higher probability swing at an important position like quarterback. And that's when the rebuild that's when we're officially kicking in potential contention mode with this rookie deal quarterback, because Malik Willis is not, he's going to be a terrible NFL starter if he starts in 2022. Yeah. How he does in fantasy, that's a different story. But he is going to be an absolute dog shit quarterback if a team gives him the Zach Wilson treatment. We just saw it with Zach Wilson, who's significantly less raw than Malik Willis.
Yeah.
Willis is going to be so bad. And you're taking him and it's like, all right, you've already lost 1 year on the rookie deal because he's either sitting and trying to learn or he's absolutely sucking. And I think that these are the decisions that NFL GMs, they can't even make because they're too concerned about, we want the ownership to think we have a plan. I just need to make it to next season. And that's kind of my big rant on what the NFL does wrong. But it ultimately ties back to contract insecurity with these GMs.
You're totally right. And you always hear the phrase on Twitter. It's like, well, the NFL doesn't run their team like a fantasy team. And like, yeah, that's very, very true. But like to an extent, because like there's a big difference between saying like, obviously a bunch of fantasy GMs would not be better at running NFL teams than NFL GMs. But like from a strategic, like optimization perspective, like fantasy managers for the most part actually like optimize their probability on general better than NFL people do, because you don't get fired. Like you cannot fire yourself from your fantasy team, which is a nice thing. And so what we often see, right, is like people talk about how to rebuild with an NFL or with a dynasty team, right? Mm-hmm. Is you talk about running backs, like you want these running backs on the rookie contracts for your fantasy team, and running backs, kind of like quarterbacks for an NFL team, are probably like the largest determining factor often for whether you win or lose in a dynasty league. It's a little bit different in a redraft league where you can do more funky things with 0 RB and waiver wires and stuff. But like usually if you're like full on contention mode, you probably need at least like 1 stud running back on your dynasty team in that given year. And most people that rebuild appropriately will make that the last portion, right? Like I'm in a league right now where I did 2 years. I went for it in my home dynasty league that Tom's in. And then last year we got like about halfway through the year. I was like, man, this team is like running on fumes. Like we could get
Tom also won.
Tom did win. He won it in year one.
Pick
And
that
I was
up.
like, man, this team's running on fumes. Like, I could maybe like grind out the 6 seed, but like, who really cares? Like, I'm not making it on the playoffs. So like, I sold like freaking everything, and we're like, we like blew it up last year. This year we're gonna just suck, and I have like a million picks. I have like 4 firsts this year. I have 4 firsts next year. Basically, like all I have in place is like AJ Brown, Brandon Ayuk, and Dak, and then like everything else is like just a bunch of guys that I hope I can flip for some seconds and thirds, and then just picks. And it's like this year in this class, like I won't be drafting Breece Hall. I would like to either trade that or I'll potentially draft Willis or whatever, because like I don't want to waste prime running back productive years on a team that's not going to be doing anything and it's not going to be competitive because they have the shortest windows. I want to build that quarterback and that wide receiver foundation around them. And I think that's really similar in NFL. Like Josh said, the best time you can win, or really the only time you can win in the NFL probabilistically without great quarterback play, is with cheap quarterback play. And the only way to get cheap, good quarterback play is on a quarterback with a rookie deal. And it's like what we saw what happened with the Cardinals, where the Cardinals drafted Kyler. Well, first they drafted Rosen, and then they drafted Kyler, and they weren't in any place to compete. This was like the first year they built any half-decent team around him, and it was already year 3. I love what the Lions are doing, where potentially if they don't draft Malik this year, they've now done 2 years of building up everything else. They built up the interior last year. They can build up the boundaries this year, and then they get a rookie quarterback, and it's like, okay, now we're ready to go. Like,
Yeah.
40, it's really, really enticing to be in that position like the Seahawks were in, or like the Chargers are in, where like you can actually be a Super Bowl contender and spend big with a rookie quarterback while they're on the rookie deal. Whereas when people make the quarterback the first part of their rebuild, then if that quarterback's good, you're already paying them by an extension by the time the rest of your team is ready to compete, and you're kind of screwed.
Go ahead, Billy. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
One of the biggest reasons why I'm worried about the first quarterback off the board in this draft class, I think that's probably Malik Willis. That's the big betting favorites. But a lot of the teams that there is a gauntlet of teams that are ready to take a quarterback, but not ready to compete at the top of the draft class. Josh mentioned the Lions, the Panthers, and the Falcons
are terrifying.
Yeah, it's 3, like there's a gauntlet of teams that could easily draft him and just say, go. And Malik Willis will have a good career, I think. But it's terrifying to think he's going to start off in this horrible situation when there's other situations when we have players like Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral in the back end of the first that could go to teams like the Saints or teams like Pittsburgh that have a really well built out wide receiving core, a decent defense, a good setup around them where they could use this guy properly. Like it's scary to look at the teams that could be taking someone like Malik Willis and just hope and pray that someone trades up, maybe with the Falcons, and just sets him up in a better situation.
So I disagree with you by half, but I agree with you by the other half. Like, I think that as much as I don't like taking Willis for the Lions, I actually really like the Lions taking Willis for Willis, in the sense that, like, I'm not big on the idea of a quarterback has to sit for a year. Like, I agree that, like, if Willis plays this year, he's going to be total trash. I think that's fine. Like, I think that you learn by doing. I think that the Lions are actually like a pretty ideal situation for Willis because, one, they have Goff there. Goff's not going anywhere. So if they decide it's best for Willis's development to sit Willis for a year and just have Goff play anyway, I think that's fine. I don't think that's a great use of resources from the Lions' perspective, but just strictly looking at Willis as a dynasty asset, that's okay. And then the other hand is like, if they're like, you know what, Willis, like we're 1-7, like go play the second half of the season. I just think that's a really like low pressure environment with some tools. Like, he will have Swift there. He'll have Amon-Ra there. He'll have Hawkinson there. They're probably going to draft a receiver at 32 or 34. If they do take Willis, they have Chark there. Like, and they have a really nice O-line. So I think that it at least provides like a decent enough supporting cast on offense. And they'll probably be 1-7 by the time he takes over. That it's like, you know what, Willis, like, here, you have some nice pieces around you. Just go have fun, make a bunch of mistakes, and it's okay because like Holmes isn't going anywhere. Campbell's not going anywhere. You won't have this like gross, tense environment like Chicago was last year. The Panthers are the one that terrifies me because Matt Rule is coaching for his job. Like, he knows that if he doesn't win this year, he's done. And they also have zero O-line whatsoever. And so like, that's like the Nagy situation to me, where if a quarterback goes there, like they're going to play way too soon, because if they start out like 1-3 with Darnold, they're going to be like, all right, we're benching Sam Darnold. We're throwing in this rookie. We don't care if he's ready. And if he's not, it doesn't matter. His development isn't our concern. Like, we're just like, right. Like they're just going to be like,
Yeah.
instead of whatever the plan is for Willis, if it's Detroit and it's Campbell, like they're going to decide on that plan based on Willis and his long-term future. Matt Rule will be making decisions based on Matt Rule. And like, that's a terrifying proposition for anyone who ends up in Carolina.
I think one of the funny parts about the NFL is how coaches manipulate their way to keeping their job longer than they should. Because if the Carolina Panthers draft a quarterback, it's Rule being like, but it's a rookie. Give me 2 years with him. I bet you I can turn it around. Sam
bet you
Darnold
cannot.
was always garbage. But you know what I mean? And quite clear. Yeah. So I agree. I'm scared for Carolina the same way I'm scared with Detroit, where I think that drafting your offensive lineman should be your like number one priority. When you got guys like Tyler Linderbaum just sitting there waiting for you, you just take him in Detroit, and you'd have one of the top 5 offensive linemen going into 2023, where you draft the best quarterback on the board when you finish as the worst pick or worst team in the league, and you draft a quarterback 101. Like that's easy money, right? But these coaches just manage to stick around because they can manipulate this is a rookie quarterback. Give me at least 1 year. You can't, whatever. And then why I'm scared for guys like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, where they have coaches and GMs and coordinators that drafted them, and they're not there anymore. So it's rookie year, version 2, and that doesn't work out well. That's why I'm also very scared for Lawrence and definitely still scared for Justin Fields. Like those are 2 players that I'm very weary of for that reason. Coaching 100% matters. I just want to shout out Dave here, who left this comment, but I didn't want to put it up because it would block Jacob while he's speaking again. And I seem to do that every time. Yeah, there he is. In the Bulletproof Discord, I likened it to the board CEOs of corporations prioritizing short-term stock prices over long-term success. And I think that pretty much nails it right on the head. I think we generally got time for one more, Josh. One more question here before you got to get out of here. I just want to know,
before we continue, one more quick thought on the quarterbacks. I think the only time that a poverty franchise that just looks terrible should draft a quarterback early is when it's the absolute elite talent. And that I don't think teams should ever model themselves off the Bengals in terms of the window where they go, oh, we were a terrible team. We had no O-line built out. We took Burrow and we went to the Super Bowl in year 2. But I do think that them taking Burrow was the right process, and that when you have that can't miss quarterback, I think then it's okay to say, hey, we know we're wasting at least 1 season of him where we know it's not a good environment because this guy's such an elite talent. And that's why I think Malik Willis is the wrong choice. If you're going, hey, it's okay, like we're burning a development year, I think the calculus changes because not only do you burn at least 1 year of a development year, but it's not even like a Burrow where it's like, oh, he can't miss. And it's where it was hard to imagine Burrow not being at least a quality NFL starter. It's like Mac Jones, where you take him and it's like, it's really hard for me to see him not being at least a quality starter, and that this guy's such a good passer of the football that doesn't really matter where he goes. He's going to at least have a good NFL career and be productive. And that's why I think Lawrence to the Jaguars, it made sense. Sure, that team was going nowhere, but at least we got what looks on paper like an elite quarterback prospect. So I think that's the one scenario where I think it doesn't matter what the team looks like. You have to take him. Malik Willis, though, clearly not that guy. He has some elite tools, but there's also a lot about his profile that makes me think that him actually being a top 10 real life NFL quarterback is quite a long shot for him.
It's unfortunate that perhaps a guy like Lamar Jackson, who was taken 32nd, right, kind of, I guess, was viewed at the time almost the same way as Malik, just, with a Heisman Trophy to his name and a little bit better prospect. And now Malik's getting pushed all the way up to the opposite end of that board.
Crazy how far the NFL has come in such a short amount of time.
Exactly. And now,
if Lamar came out in this draft class, like, there'd be no question who's the better prospect.
He'd be the 101. Teams would be trading up to get the 101 to draft.
Unfortunately, they're setting Willis up for massive failure and expectations at that high of a price, and it's going to do more damage to the perception of quarterbacks who run and have a different pigment than most others. I want to get one more.
Lamar changed NFL history, though, right? Like we didn't know how big of a success he would be yet, even after his rookie year, but we saw enough that, like, I mean, I think Kyler's a little bit different, but he goes 1 overall the next year. There is not a single world in which Trey Lance goes to number 3 overall last year if Lamar Jackson didn't hit the way that he hit, right? There's not a world in which Malik Willis is being bandied about as a top 10 pick if Lamar Jackson didn't hit the way that he hit. Like, it is wild. You know, like, I mean, heck, what was it? 2 years ago, Jalen Hurts was a 2nd-round pick. I mean, Jalen Hurts is a better prospect than Malik Willis, like in my estimation. So it's pretty crazy.
Jalen Hurts would be the best quarterback prospect in this class, I think, pretty clearly. That's just why I'm so afraid of where these guys go and what teams are going to do and how they're burning such valuable picks on an early quarterback in 2022 when none of these guys look can't miss. Sure, could there be some quality NFL starters here? Yes. Do I think there's going to be anyone that's a difference maker where it's like, oh, you know what? Doesn't matter how expensive they are, like a Rodgers, or where you're like, you know what? Doesn't matter the price. We want this guy. And I think that you're looking at ceilings where it's like a Kirk Cousins. And are they a good real life NFL quarterback? Yes. Is this the kind of guy where when you're actually paying them top dollar that you can have a truly Super Bowl contending roster around them? Probably not.
Just don't draft Pickett and just wait and draft Carson Strong 2 rounds later. Like that's one of the I
don't like Strong that much, but I really don't like Pickett, so I'm okay with that.
I just want Corral to be good because he's so swaggy when he plays. I really just want him to be good. That's all. I want Tennessee to draft him just so we can back
Corral's
up.
Corral's got a little bit of Baker energy.
But hopefully better play because
you shouldn't have said that to Tom.
Hey,
he does,
I'm fine with the energy, just not with handing the ball to the other team more than any other quarterback since it's come into the league. And then we got Toronto Dave with the Sam Howell.
If the NFL agreed, I would love to. I really wish that the NFL would confirm my belief that Sam Howell is good, but it seems that the NFL thinks that he is not good. And they're probably right because the NFL is very bad at telling us what quarterbacks are good, but they're generally pretty good at telling us what quarterbacks are bad.
Yeah, and I think a guy like Ritter, who we're going to talk about on our draft shows coming up starting next week, the countdown, not the count up. Ritter is making noise not only in fantasy communities, but a lot of beat reporters and people that are very smart in the NFL seem to be pushing Ritter up boards, which I think is kind of crazy. And it did start with that really good 40 time for Ritter. Look, Josh, one thing we like to do when we get out of here on shows, we like to get a little bit of info from our guests. So being from San Diego, what's your favorite sports memory? I know the Chargers are gone. I'm very sorry for that. But what is your favorite sports memory growing up in San Diego?
Oh my goodness, you're hitting me. So first I get the fun fact wrong. All that was on the show sheet was favorite San Diego sports memory. So this is not a growing up memory. It actually is a recent memory.
No, it does not have to be a growing up memory.
It doesn't have to be. It's just how I phrase it.
It does not have to be the slightest.
Tom's just changing the show sheet on me.
I'm sorry, it's just how
What is going on?
We need to know about your favorite experience in Tucson, Arizona now.
So my favorite sports memory is actually really recent. Why I'm full-time in the fantasy industry and how this ended up happening was spurred by COVID because I was with the San Diego Padres in their business analytics department at the time. When you're doing attendance projections and customer journeys and all your analysis involves people actually showing up and buying tickets. And then you find out that for all of 2020 season, there won't be tickets being sold. They let go of you. So I was actually furloughed. That's kind of how I started working with Matt even more than just on weekends was because of that. And I kind of found out that I was probably going to get ultimately COVID fired. But just before that happened, the Padres made the playoffs in 2020. And awesome. Every employee, including the furloughed ones, got to go see their playoff wild card games when there were no fans in the stands and it was just the employees in the boxes. That will probably forever be the coolest memory that I have in San Diego until or if a San Diego sports team wins an actual world championship, which hasn't happened yet. But if that happens, that'll replace this memory. But being able to see the Padres win a playoff series and getting to hang out in the box with all the employees and having that very unique atmosphere where the stadium is just empty. Got some very good memories from that day. So I think that's an experience I'll treasure. And I think if I wasn't in fantasy football, it would not be as good of an experience. And I'd be like, wow, I can't believe they canned me. But fortunately, I have a job that I enjoy right now, even despite that. So that's just, it's a very happy memory, is getting to hang out and watching this empty ballpark playoff series come from behind wild card win.
Love
awesome. Billy, do you have a favorite San Diego related sports memory?
I have one, and it's not really a memory directly pertaining to San Diego sports, but I had a buddy growing up who he was kind of the guy who didn't really get into local sports, so he just picked like the first team he saw on TV to become a fan of, and that was the San Diego team. So he was a Chargers fan, he was a Padres fan, and that was fine. At the time, though, he used to absolutely talk so much trash about Trevor Hoffman. He was like, Trevor Hoffman is the greatest player to ever play the game of baseball. He would be so excited about him until one fateful day ahead of the 2009 season. Trevor Hoffman took a trip to the Milwaukee Brewers, my team, and I got to spend the rest of recess talking so much trash that number 600 came with the Milwaukee Brewers. So I have been riding that high for years. I'm still friends with that guy, and he's still upset that he had to watch number 600 with Hoffman as a Milwaukee Brewer.
I love
that. That is a proud Padres moment. I feel like every time I do these, it's anti the team I'm talking about. Like I kind of did that. But yeah, I love me some Trevor Hoffman. I'm glad he got the bulk of his career in San Diego.
Me too.
Love it. Yeah. Jacob, do you have a favorite San Diego?
No, but I have a very vivid least favorite San Diego sports memory, so I'm doing that one instead. But it'll be like a pleasant one for Josh, I'm sure. So I find it so weird, first of all, that I like love the Chargers now, because I just love Staley. Even when he was on the Rams, like I remember texting with like my buddies, and I was like, man, I listened to this Brandon Staley interview. Like, I think he really gets it. Like, I think this is like this sharp defensive coach that like understands like analytics. And then like he's been doing everything so fun. The Chargers fast, and it's just like the Twitter wars are endless every time they play in prime time and go for it on a fourth down, that I'm like just very, very invested in the Chargers' success now. But I grew up like detesting the Chargers. Outside of the Patriots, by far my two least favorite teams growing up were the Chargers and the Steelers, because they're the teams that have the most heartbreaking Colts defeats in the playoffs. And I think the big turning point for me on like my feelings about the Chargers was definitely when Rivers came to play for the Colts, because I could not stand Phillip Rivers for my entire childhood. He was like right behind Brady and Roethlisberger, and then I had to root for him. I was like, okay, well, I guess I like the Chargers okay now. I don't detest them anymore. But by far the toughest was back prior to fantasy football, when I got like way more emotionally invested in football. And when I was a kid, I didn't understand how to control my emotions or like take myself out of situations. And I was 12. The 2009 Colts was a really fun season. They started 3-4 and they won 9 games in a row. And the Chargers that year were total trash for the whole year. They were 4-8, and then they won 4 games in a row to go 8-8. And we played them in the wild card round. And I remember initially growing up as a little 12-year-old socialist being extremely upset that the Chargers got to have a home playoff game against us. We were 12-4 and they were 8-8. And I thought that divisions were just completely unfair and a manifestation of the capitalist state. And then the game went to overtime. And on a crucial third down, they called a defensive holding on Dwight Freeney. And at that time, that was the first time I'd ever heard of defensive holding from like a D lineman, like holding an offensive lineman so someone else could go through. And I was convinced that they made up a new penalty just to make my life miserable. And like 2 plays later, I believe LT like ran into the end zone and scored a game-winning touchdown, him or Sproles. And I was miserable. And I like sat on the the floor of my kitchen crying, and my mom probably still remember this. And I was like, why would I even live if we lost this wild card game to the Chargers? And I like still think back on this now, double that age, is that was about halfway to my current life. And I'm like, man, that's now how I feel when I lose in fantasy football, that I channeled this ridiculous, unhealthy energy into an actual profession. Because I really haven't changed actually at all since that point in time. I just focused it elsewhere.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm gonna give you two. One's anti San Diego and one's pro San Diego. I'm gonna start with the anti San Diego. 4th and 1 at the end of the game. Ravens, Chargers playing in Baltimore. Ray Lewis shoots the gap, ends the game on a 4th and 1 handoff that went to Darren Sproles for some reason on the 4th and 1. Won the game, walked it off. One of my favorite. I remember standing up screaming, and I threw something across my living room because I was so excited for that play. So that's my favorite against San Diego. My favorite 4 is I got to watch Tony Gwynn play in Toronto when I was younger. And that is something I talked last week, talking about watching Ken Griffey and how he absolutely murked the fans after scaling the wall. Gwynn was the ultimate pro. I remember he came early and he signed I didn't get one, fuck's sakes. But he signed baseballs for fans. He signed bats, jerseys, hats, and he would always talk to the fans in the outfield. So getting to watch the late great Tony Gwynn play ball in Toronto when I was younger is quite possibly my favorite moment for sports in San Diego.
Tony Gwynn's son, also a Milwaukee Brewer.
Yeah, Tony Gwynn Jr.
Tony Gwynn Jr. He had a stint.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the swing as his old man. Guys, that's going to do it. I want to thank everyone for popping into the chat. We had Toronto Dave. He's in here. He's in all the time. We love him so much.
Yeah.
How is there not being an
Good
Anchorman reference? There actually was when I called San Diego. So obviously you weren't here at the start of the show. So you told on yourself, Dave. But thanks for everyone else and you too, Dave, for joining us today. This is great. Episode 9. We start a rookie countdown. I'm gonna do the typical what does everyone have doing, because you still have to do that. Not everyone knows. Jacob?
Go fuck yourself, San Diego.
Fair enough. Billy?
I just released.
Nobody saw that. Okay, people have seen Anchorman, right? They don't think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought that was going to get more laughs.
It was
Oh,
solid.
she just surprised me.
I thought the no sell was better.
Little out of left field. When you have to explain a joke, Jacob, it's
Well, I didn't
Billy?
think I'd have to explain it, but then just no one reacted, and I thought that people just thought that I really hated San Diego, and I got scared.
Now Jacob's the guy on Twitter that's like, am I joking? Am I not joking?
Yeah, exactly.
This is what's called generalized anxiety disorder, playing out in real time.
Anyway, I just released my first mock draft that I've been doing. I did on the Lions. That was very topical because I did a could do where they took Malik Willis and a should do where they took Kyle Hamilton. So appreciate that shout out. Next one should be coming out later this week.
Love that. Josh, any particular work you'd like to mention?
So I don't know exactly when this podcast is coming out, but tomorrow / Wednesday of this week, I'll be on the Podfather Matt Kelly's Mind of Mansion show. So I would say if you want more of my work, more of my thoughts, we'll have a nice 2-hour show, big show sheet. We will cover a lot of Dynasty stuff, a lot of best ball stuff, team building, roster construction, all that is going to be covered. So tune into that tomorrow / Wednesday.
We love that. Josh, you gave us an initial time and you stuck around even longer. We love that. It's nice to know people have a great time and they enjoy spending time with us like the people do. As I mentioned, you're going to want to go to Underdog Fantasy, get all of that taken care of, get your deposit if you never played before, use promo code Full Tilt. You're going to want to do that. Next week, it is time. We started this show during the draft period when we really kicked it into gear. We love it. We're excited. The consensus rankings of all 6 members of the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast brand are in. They've been calculated. We start the countdown Tuesday next week. Video, graphs, we're doing the whole thing. We're going all out.
Number 20, Wandale Robinson says in. You can't keep him off the list, Billy.
as much as you tried, Jacob's already giving away some players. Guys and gals, we want to thank everyone for coming in, popping by. We love and appreciate every single one of you. Go and like, subscribe to all things Full Tilt. And I like to end the show the same ways that I always do. Be kind to one another. Check in on your loved ones. Don't be a human pile of garbage. Don't be a piece of shit. Remember that clear eyes, full hearts can't lose, and that your best days, well, they're always spent tilting. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Josh.